And we are getting into our first segment, which is Empowering Women in Islam, Insights from Surah An-Nur. This segment explores Surah An-Nur and its connection to Islamic feminism, which advocates gender equality within Islamic teachings and challenging traditional interpretations. The movement gained momentum in the late 20th century, empowering women in education, work and family life. Despite controversy, it continues to shape legal reforms, academic discourse and activism while preserving religious and cultural identities. Now we have with us our first guest, Sophia, who is a PhD researcher and a MA dissertation supervisor at the SOAS University of London, a lecturer of Islamic Studies at the Foundation of International Education, and a lecturer of Philosophy of Religion at Verto Education. Assalamu alaikum, good morning and welcome to the Breakfast Show.
Good morning to you and all the listeners.
Thank you very much for joining us. And just, getting straight into the first question, we are talking about a very interesting topic. Just getting into the first question. As some active on digital platforms, as someone who is active on digital platforms, have you observed any differences between Islamic teachings and the realities of Muslim women?
I want us to be clear about what do we mean when we talk about Islamic teachings or Islamic traditions, because usually when we say that, majority of the people, they think the Qur'an and the Hadith. But there is a big but. So in the era of the Prophet, or let's say shortly after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, these were the traditions. However, a century later, we have the Qur'an, the Hadith, and the precedents or the laws of the Khalifas. At the same time, we have Muslim communities splitting into sects, each sect having their own teachings and their own traditions. Then as the time passes, we have the madahib, the laws of school, and then extra 300 years later, we have also the scholars, the individual scholars. 500 years later, we have also the politics. So one thing that every Muslim needs to be aware is that there is no such thing as one universal Islamic tradition or Islamic teaching. Now, having clarified that, there are big differences. First of all, it's education. The Quran is clear that the Quran says that a believer cannot know Allah unless is educated, unless it has knowledge. Now, we have hadith from the Prophet, which says that seeking knowledge is obligatory for every Muslim, male and female. However, the lived realities of women in many Muslim majority communities is that they are barred from meaningful religious education. And I want to clarify, reciting the Quran is not meaningful religious education. And we need to be aware that in many communities, reciting the Quran does not equate understanding the Quran. Also, we have, like right now in Afghanistan, women are legally barred from knowledge. So one is education. The second is work and economic participation. We have the paradigm of the wife of the Prophet, Khadija, we all know that, and other female Sahaba that they were working, they were producing. Again, today's societal pressure often excludes women from the workplace. Or, on the other hand, if the woman works, she needs to participate in expenses of the household, which we know that that's not what the Quran and what the prophetic tradition has told us. Modesty, you talked about modesty earlier in relation to Surah An-Nur. As you said, and I'm really happy that you clarified that, each individual, each Muslim, male and female, are responsible for their own modesty, and the other side needs to lower their gaze. However, that's not how it's being practiced today. And we know that. I will not elaborate due to time economy, but we know that that's not the case anymore. A great level of oppression of women today is being justified on modesty. However, this should not be the case. And the last thing, it's also marriage. We know that in the Quran and in the prophetic tradition, a woman is is supposed to consent to the marriage. There is no such thing as forced marriage in Islam, or let's say in the proto-Islamic tradition. And also there is the element of khula, of divorce. And on this one, I want to clarify two things, very important things. We have the tradition of Barira, the hadith of Barira, that she wanted to divorce her husband, and the Prophet allowed that, based solely on the fact that Barira stated that she has no need of her husband. So there was nothing majestic. The husband was not beating her or abusing her. She just didn't like him anymore. But today, if a woman goes to a scholar to obtain a khula, there are so many barriers. Like she needs to prove the unthinkable for the scholars to permit a khula, which is an important element. Another important element, often within families, within communities, a hadith from the Prophet is being quoted where the Prophet said that from the permissibles, the one that Allah dislikes the most is divorce. However, what the hadith says, if we go to the Arabic text, it mentions talaq. It doesn't mention khula. So the type of, because in English, we have one word for divorce, divorce. In Arabic, the male-initiated divorce is talaq. The female is khula. So the Prophet said that specifically the male-initiated divorce is disliked by Allah. He didn't say that about the female divorce. But the lived realities of women is that, you cannot divorce your husband because God will be displeased. We have the violence. I don't want to go into elaboration of the violence because it's a very sensitive topic. I don't think it's good for morning show. But we all know that the Prophet was kind and gentle with women. That's not the lived reality of many Muslim women today. And the final is the religious participation. The Prophet was asking and advising the people of his era to let women go to the mosques. Women had access to religious education. We know that two of the Prophet's wives, they became hadithat, the hadith. Women in just the example of Waraqa, that she led mixed congregation, okay? And again, today, we have limited access to mosques for women. If we have any space, usually is not a good space, and all women know that. We have women barred from meaningful religious education again. And of course, we have, when we talk nowadays about female imams, the first reaction of the majority of Muslims is shock and fear, and the response is, but there is no such thing, which is wrong. We do have female imams. In China, the oldest female-led mosque was established in 1820. But it's something that the lived experiences of Muslims have erased it from history.
Okay, just a follow-up question on this. We're looking at knowing that you are a PhD researcher and MA dissertation supervisor at the Surrey University of London, and lecturer of Islamic Studies. I just wanted to ask you, which women in Islamic history inspire you as a person, and why?
Okay, so I have two of them. And again, before I proceed in answering your question, I need to clarify that usually when we hear the words Islamic history, we think of the past. History is being perceived as something of the far away past, but that's not true. History is every day. Whatever you did yesterday, it's history. It's your history. So my historical figures of Islam are contemporary. The one which it's because of her that I decided my path in education. Her name is Shireen Khan. She is Denmark's and Scandinavia's in general first female imam. She has established the women-led mosque Mariam in Copenhagen. And Shireen is of a Finnish mother and a Syrian father. which is very important. The connotation is important. This idea that Islam and Muslims are only people from the Middle East or only people from South Asia should also be removed from the consciousness of Muslims. Muslims today, we are everywhere, and we come from every ethnicity. The second very important woman is Amina Wadud. I believe that most people know about Amina Wadud. She's an African-American Muslim theologian and retired now professor, so she's an academic. She's the one that led the movement of female imams having public presence. She led a mixed congregation in the late 1990s in Africa, South Africa, and then again in the early 2000s in the USA. She has written 3 books, but 2 of the books are very important when it comes to women being valued, Muslim women being valued, and also Muslim women having direct relationship with Allah without the need of a male being intermediary. Also, Amina Wadud, she's a convert, which again, it's very important. We don't talk enough about converts and how converts have contributed into the Islamic tradition.
I see. And just lastly, from a historical sociological view, how has the concept of female empowerment within Islamic traditions evolved?
Well, it has its ups and downs. So in the first century, in the proto-Islamic era, which is the 7th century, women were elevated. As you mentioned earlier, rightfully so, Islam did give rights to women, unprecedented rights for the standards of the era. Laws were created in the Qur'an in name or oral advice to support the value of women, etc. So this was very empowering. Islam was very empowering to women. Then we have from the 8th to the 13th century, we start seeing slowly women diminishing from the public space and from roles of leadership and from roles of disseminating knowledge. We have the development of fiqh, which, as we know, those of us that we know about fiqh, some schools of law, they inform their laws not only from the Quran and the Hadith, but also from the local traditions, which of course allowed patriarchal norms to infiltrate. So we start having patriarchy growing within the Islamic traditions, and women slowly but steadily disappearing from the public sphere. Then we have, I need to mention something here. There is a romanticized tendency of Muslims to see the past. The only women that we have names and history of from this era are women that primarily learned something from their fathers, or they gave money to charitable, purposes. One of these women is Fatima al-Fihri from Morocco, and many people today bring her as an example that, she was an empowered woman and she established the first university in Morocco. But this is not the truth. What al-Fihri did is she donated her money to establish a mosque, a small mosque. As the centuries moved on, this small mosque, after her death, became eventually a university. But in her time, this was not a university. She did not establish a university, and she herself was not educated. We don't have any evidence that she was a teacher or she had meaningful education. So we move to the 14th and 18th century. Women are the seclusion of women starts being very popular, especially for high-class women. So women are to be locked in their houses. If in public, they need to be fully covered, etc. Again, the only women that we know historically, Muslim women that we know historically, are in relation to powerful men. So wives of powerful men or daughters of powerful men. But a woman on her own value, we don't have any historical precedent like that. Then comes the 19th and 20th century. This was, as you mentioned earlier, you said that Islamic feminism started emerging in the 20th century. This is right. Because we have the era of colonization and we have the era where Muslims start realizing that scientifically and technologically they have been lacking in comparison to other nations. And also we have the uprisings. Muslim populations want to get rid of the oppression of Europeans. In these fights, Muslim women were mobilized. And I know a story from Egypt where what was happening is that people were protesting, but the soldiers and the police, if you wish, personnel of the local communities were locals. So in Egypt, the soldiers were Egyptian. Now, Egyptian soldiers would refuse to harm or touch women. Therefore, the people who arranged the protests, they were putting women on the front so that nobody will stop the protests and the people marching. This empowered women. However, once the politics changed in the local communities, men wanted women to go back to their domestic roles and not get involved in the society. However, women had already tasted how it feels to be active participants in their society, and they refused to do that. And that's how the first scholarship of Islamic feminism emerged. So this is the first era for women that they actually start getting again empowered. Now, to do that, they go back to the sources. They go back to the Qur'an, they go back to the Hadith, and they justify their wish to be active participants. And now we have today, we have the 21st century, where we have women obtaining higher education, female scholars of Islam, we have organizations like Musawa or Sisters in Islam that they advocate with local governments about the improvement of the laws. And of course, we have the emergence of female imams, female-led mosques, which slowly but steadily grows in entire Europe. I already told you about China. It's old news there. In Africa also, we have them for more than a century. So we see that right now Muslim women are on the peak, if you wish, of their empowerment from Islamic perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for answering our questions. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
You too. Bye-bye. That was Sophia, who is a PhD researcher and MA dissertation supervisor at SOAS University of London, a lecturer of Islamic Studies at the Foundation of International Education, and a lecturer of Philosophy of Religion at Voto Education.